Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Yeah, that's very, very enthusiastic. I'm already charged up for the presentation. But indeed, couple thank yous. Number one, thank you to the Pegasus team for having me, starting with Ken, of course, Hiram, Heath, Chad, Dennis, and Sarah and her entire team. I'd also like to thank John Wayne for simultaneously making my day and ruining my day. Made my day because that presentation was unbelievable. Outstanding. Sitting there a couple minutes after I was on an emotional high, I have to tell you. I sat there for 5 minutes and contemplated what you said and have been all day. But then you talked about some characteristics that are needed in Americans. I started to show some characteristics of my own, egocentric and selfish. Sitting there, and I said to myself, that was unbelievable. How the hell am I going to top that? And I've made some presentations around and never considered myself the best, but could always compete. So now I get on this emotional roller coaster. I had to go up to my room to kind of reevaluate the situation. I'm on YouTube looking for yoga videos to get my breathing back in line. So my wife starts texting me while I'm up there. And she's asking, did you rehearse last night? Did you iron your shirt? And I'm saying, well, the front, why would I iron the back if I'm not taking my jacket off all day? I said, well, we have bigger fish to fry here because I've been bested. And honestly, I've never had that feeling before. So she starts with the whole supportive thing, and she's saying, you're a Danny effing G. That's an inside joke of the family, but that has meaning to us. So I tried to invoke some of the things that I learned from John Wayne. I said, well, I'm feeling vulnerable. And she comes back and says, stop being a wuss. And you're in Texas, put your cowboy pants on and pony up. Now, you have to understand something here. Yeah. No, you have to understand something here. My wife's native born and raised in Colombia. She's Colombiana. So now I have a whole other thing going on in my mind. So I start texting. I was like, you're spending a little much time with your American gringa friends out in Southern California giving me the attitude. So now I have the whole thing to deal with when I get back. But that's the dynamic that's been through. So to come full circle, and I was thinking of this during the breakout on the war on talent, that corporate culture, and that's a big deal at Pegasus and something that I admire a lot about them, is that you want to create an environment where the people around you are going to push you to be better. So I took what I learned this morning and I said, you are Danny effing G. And you've been bested, but get up there and make your best. Run up the flagpoles to see who salutes. And that is what you're going to see here. So, if you like it, I'm going to thank John Wayne again. If you don't like it, I'm going to blame him anyway, because I just withered on the vine. So, with that, we have less than an hour to talk. I noticed we started a little bit late, so maybe you can indulge me if we run over. But if we can make it interactive, questions, comments, perspective. I'm going to say some provocative things here today. And if you disagree, please say so, because I'm always talking about searching for a higher supply chain truth. And that's never going to come from one person. It's going to come from a group of people. So let's keep it real. Let's keep it going. And I am an adjunct professor, and if I don't get volunteers, I will seek them, okay? Best way to keep people paying attention at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Predictions, 22 and 23. Supply chain, logistics, and trade compliance as well. Quick agenda. We're going to set the stage. We're going to run through these first half a dozen slides pretty quickly because really I want to not necessarily validate, but substantiate why I'm making some of these, what some people might consider some doomsday predictions about the economy and its impact on logistics, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to turn it into a lecture on economics because I would exhaust my knowledge of economics in about 30 seconds and it just wouldn't work anyway. We'll go through some figures. Figures don't lie, kind of. Trade predictions for the balance of this year and into 2023. Ramifications for our industry, and what's a company to do? Be you a BCO, a beneficial cargo owner, a shipper, or a third-party logistics company? Sound reasonable? All right, let's have at it. Okay. Consumption in the U.S. economy. Our economic growth, GDP, gross domestic product, 70% based on consumption. Meaning, we as consumers go out and buy durables, automobiles, washing machines, things of this nature, and non-durables, clothes and shoes and bicycles and sporting goods and such. That's 70%. You can see the breakdown on the left. We're not going to talk about that very much. As we all know, consumption is based on a person's disposable income, what most people would refer to as their take-home pay after taxes. And everybody knows that disposable income is down because of inflation. Rent is up, gas is up. In fact, I noticed something. I hadn't been to Texas in quite some time. And of course, I live in California, so it occurred to me that you guys are now expressing your price per gallon of gasoline on the half a gallon model, because it's $6.60 a gallon in California and $3.30 here. So me being the math major that I am, said to myself, oh, they must be expressing that on a half a gallon basis. Is that not funny? I've been rehearsing that for 2 hours. Come on, that's funny. No more math jokes, okay? I think the data security guy exhausted us on math. I found that presentation to be fascinating, by the way. I hope the gentleman's here. It was excellent. In any event, I just said this, third bullet. More and more folks, your paycheck goes to rent, food, and gas. Spend more, get less. Everybody knows that. The other piece is, and you probably heard this on the news, is that personal consumption in the post-COVID are what I like to call, we went from COVID to no-vid. That's funny, too. Tank and bad here. Tank and bad. Stick to the material. Okay. But personal consumption has shifted back out to dinner, going back on vacation. You can't spend the same buck in two places. You can't buy a washing machine and go to Cabo with the same dollar. Interest rates have increased, put the brakes on U.S. housing market. So you can already see this starts to have a little bit of a downer vibe to it. But let me tell you this. I believe in the U.S. economy. Definitely believe in the resilience of the U.S. consumer. I just invested in a business that is very much involved in the logistics and supply chain space. So don't get me wrong about what I'm telling you, because I've put my money where my mouth is. So I believe there's huge opportunity here. It's just a different ball game for these and other reasons. So here's some figures, and this is all online. Our tax dollars pay for this stuff. You should go check it out. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. Figures don't lie, kind of. I'll tell you why in just a second. But you see percentage change from the preceding quarter in GDP. So without going too deep here, Q1 and Q2, obviously we don't have Q3 yet of this year, but it's down relative to the previous quarter. So you can see that automatically. On the left-hand side, we have real disposable personal income, real meaning adjusted for inflation. And this is where the kind of piece comes in, because, and this is, again, this is straight off the website. Just copy and paste. Disposable personal income increased $291 billion in the second quarter. Okay, that sounds pretty good, right? But then you read down and it goes, real disposable personal income, adjusted for things like gasoline and food and rent and such, actually went down 5%. So you have to pay attention what you're reading when you look at these stats. But clearly, disposable income down, and on the right, the savings rate is down as well. So people are dipping into their savings to maybe take that trip to Cabo, or whatever the case might be. It's all related to this idea of disposable income. Moving along, really setting the stage for our upcoming discussion. Prices for gross domestic purchases. This is inflation. Pay attention to the light blue, if you ever look at this yourself, because it's less food and energy. How do you say inflation is a certain amount without including less food and energy? So food prices went up, goodness gracious, 14.5% in the second quarter after increasing 11.2%. What the question becomes, it's rhetorical, but the question becomes, when people are dealing with this every single day, how are you going to have the disposable income to go out and consume the things that are trucked around the country, that are flown around the country, that are brought into the country via ocean freight? That's the point we're trying to make, but I didn't want to just come out and say that without providing some stats. So let's talk a little bit about trade predictions. Trade in general, not necessarily logistics and supply chain. We'll get to that in just a sec. And what you see on the right here, another great source of statistics for our industry, I'm sure many people use it, is the U.S. Department of Transportation. Probably shouldn't have done that. I think I just broke the thing. Anyway, U.S. Department of Transportation, Bureau of Transportation Statistics. This is all publicly available information in weight and value. It's a little small, but I just wanted to illustrate the source of some of what we're talking about here in value electronics. So yellow is truck. We're going to talk about FTL, LTL in just one second. So consumer goods, like electronics, durable goods, motorized and other vehicles, mixed freight, which is everything else, including food, which is a big part of what gets trucked around the country, FTL. And if people are buying less at the supermarket, that's going to have an impact on FTL traffic also. So again, just kind of a, not so much a validation, but a source of the reason why I'm saying some of these things. So all this means, I think, that consumption will continue to drop for domestically produced goods and for imported merchandise. This drop, and you can see it already. I changed this slide around a little bit because I was going to say it's going to find its way. It already has. You can see it in rates, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But this drop in demand found its way into transportation and logistics, especially for air and ocean imports, because most of the things that we consume, consumer electronics and fashion, for certain, are 95, 98% imported. So air and ocean imports and U.S. domestic FTL. The numbers aren't in yet, but the National Retail Federation predicts that back-to-school spending will be $37 billion this year, a half point lower than last year. Well, you might say, well, that's not bad. Not adjusted for inflation. And in that uniquely American tradition, in a business sense, if you don't like the way a number looks, change the number. It's like working a budget in an Excel spreadsheet. You don't like what the end number is? We'll just change a few formulas around and we'll just work our way backwards. So not adjusted for inflation. And then they make the back-to-school season longer. Well, of course it's going to catch up in terms of sales if you start counting back to school in April. So there's a little bit of that going on too. Okay. I'm going to start this piece off with a question. On the right-hand side, you see a vector image. Take a quick look at it. It's been all through the news. I intentionally didn't put the name up here to kind of get people involved in the conversation. What's the name given to that? And if you can give a brief explanation of what it is and maybe help from your teammates here, we put together a definition of what it is. That'll be a great little opener for people to start talking. What are we talking about on the right-hand side? Who said that? Be proud. The bullwhip effect. Thank you. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that? And because people have never really heard it before, certainly on the nightly news, and you have heard a fair amount of late. What is that? Catching up is a very important piece of that. So it has a lot to do, it's as much physics, the physics of congestion in ports and rail ramps and what have you, but also psychology of buyers, the people that are buying goods on behalf of their companies to turn around and resell, being a little over enthusiastic about the future prospect of what sales are going to like from last year in 2021 and COVID till now, for example. But it's a really important concept. We could talk about this for an hour, but there's a lot of that because the merchandise that was ordered 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago is just starting to show up, even longer. Importers bringing in merchandise, doesn't even matter, laptops, clothes, jeans, what have you, for back to school, would start ordering in March for a cumulative lead time of, let's call it, 5, 6 months. Things got so wacky, they were placing orders a year in advance. So by no fault of their own, their forecast period had extended, and the longer, I'm talking a sales forecast now, the longer that sales forecast, the more inaccurate it's going to become. So that's the context within which we'll continue on here. This is what I think. Holiday shopping will also be soft for the reasons that were just articulated. All the while, bullwhip effect, imported goods will continue to arrive throughout the end of the year. I live and work and have lived and worked next to the LA Long Beach Port Complex, the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere, for the last 17 years. And that's a real bellwether of what's going on in terms of import activity. All the while, but it's also applicable to Houston, Savannah, Charleston, New York, New Jersey, my home port of Boston, Massachusetts. Stuff's still showing up, but there's already signs of sales being soft. That means that inventory levels will increase dramatically. Who heard in the news about Nike having a major drop in their stock price due to inventory gluts? Anybody? Nobody? Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. Because you know what the easiest thing about predicting the future is? If it's already happening. So I want to say, and Hiram's here, he knows because they wanted the presentation like 3 months in advance. These people are like on their game big time. But if you want to say fresh things, you want to wait a bit before you send your presentation. I sent the presentation with this on it before Nike made that announcement. So, not that that means anything to you, but it definitely means something to me. Lower holiday sales in Q3 and Q4 will impact importers' forecast for 2023. Back to the bullwhip effect. Now it's Panic City. We overbought this year. Next year we're going to underbuy. This is how it works. It's in the world of total quality management, and I was talking to an Apex instructor last night, right? Big fan of Apex. I know they changed the name, but a lot of the principles are the same. It's referred to as tampering with a supply chain where you're constantly overreacting. That's what we have going on here. So, starting to get into our conversation, all of this will influence import ocean freight rates, already has, and I'm not going to talk specific numbers, that wouldn't be appropriate, but ocean carrier, NVOCC, if you're not familiar with that term, it's non-vessel operating common carrier, that's an ocean freight forwarder that sells space on ships, reseller of space on ships, basically. Domestic transportation and warehousing and distribution costs, but in different ways, because ocean freight rates down, warehousing and distribution up. We'll talk more about that in a sec. As a friendly tip, give out gift cards this year for Christmas. I know that's really romantic and really thoughtful a thing to do, but give out gift cards. And on the 26th of December, my favorite stores, TJ Maxx, Nordstrom, Rack, Burlington, the sales are going to be off the hook. And in thinking about, gifts for my family and especially my wife, especially that lashing I got today, she'll be lucky if she gets anything for Christmas. After that, put on your cowboy pants. I'm a little off kilter over that, I gotta tell you. Anyway, I can't let it show here. A telling trend, and this is where the transition begins into our conversation. This was source U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. Again, this was actually in the Journal of Commerce, very well-known and trusted trade magazine that I have a relationship with and think a lot of. Here's the deal. Q2 2022, bottom line, inventories starting to go up. Spending starting to go down, but yet we haven't seen Q3. So very interested to see how back to school goes. Alrighty. So let's get into some specifics here. This is what I think. I have no inside track. Well, sometimes I do. If I don't, and I show you a slide, I'm going to tell you that I don't have an inside track, the scoop and all this business, because after all, I live next to LA Long Beach Port. I must know everything that goes on in LA Long Beach. I do not, nor does anybody else for that matter. So I'm just telling you what I think based on the reality and the work and the really smart people that I come in contact with every single day and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, but I'm going to stand here and stand by what I tell you. Alrighty, first of all, we already know this. We're talking about it in the breakout session. Labor shortages will, Jesus, when am I going to learn this one? Maybe I should stand in the middle. Labor, it's like an electric fence, you can only go so far. Hello? Pavlov's dog would be doing better than I would. Labor shortages drive up wages. Now you hear for drivers, for sure, justifiably. Sorry, but drivers have been disrespected and underpaid for years. That's just what I think, and I'm sure they'd probably agree. But it's not just drivers. It's warehouse people. It's office people, especially in the operations environment where the application of acquired knowledge matters. What the heck does that mean? It means you have a good operator in your business that really has learned and has applied what they've learned and is curious and constantly looking to learn new things. There's going to be continued pressure on that. We talked about the hybrid environment moving forward. companies insisting that employees come back to work entirely, no questions asked. That whole dynamic is real. I have young adult kids, and although anecdotal, I talk to them, I talk to their friends. This is for real. If I hear one more time from my daughter, who's a senior at San Diego State, that I don't want to get on the wheel, meaning that you get out of school, you get a job, you work 40 years, you blink your eyes, and it's over. I don't want to be on the wheel. And I said, well, you better goddamn do something about that, girly girl, and acquire some skills that make you different in the workplace so that you can do the things that you want to do. The pressure will continue. Warehouse space near the coasts will become more expensive than ever for a lot of different reasons. Inventory buildup in one of them. You're talking LA all the way out to the Inland Empire, which is distance-wise about 50 miles east of Southern California, but you dray a container in the middle of the day off of LA Long Beach out to the Inland Empire, you're looking at 3 hours. 99.999% space utilization out there just isn't any. And you see companies, importers especially, that shift, this has been going on for years, that shift from LA Long Beach and will now go all water through the Panama Canal, especially now that you can use bigger ships for the last, whatever it was, 5, 7, 8 years. We'll go into a Houston, we'll go into a Savannah, big time. Charleston, the same thing is happening there. I can't tell you how many people that I know, and some of whom I've worked with, that started up warehousing, distribution, fulfillment in short proximity to the Savannah port. And that starts to bug out because it's just too full. And now, okay, well, let's go to Charleston. And that's how it works. That's how it will continue to work. Naturally, more and more DCs and fulfillment will migrate towards the central U.S., which extends lead times, especially if goods are imported. And most of the consumer goods that we deal with are. That's just a fact. So you're adding to your lead time. FTL rates, I think, will continue to trend down, mostly because domestic consumption. I don't know the statistic, because I couldn't find it, oddly enough, in that DOT website I was looking at. But a lot of the FTL stuff, you don't realize, is the food we eat and the packaging that is used to package up our food. So if people are eating less because stuff costs more, that's just one reason. A lot of the FTL stuff is based on goods that were originally imported. There's going to be less imports coming in next year, I think. So my belief is that the dynamic on FTL will go down. However, LTL will grow. Smaller orders, perhaps, no more full truckload orders, but I think in cubic meters. I'm too much of an ocean freight guy. I was going to say, 10 cubic meters of truck freight. That really doesn't apply. Cubic feet. I think LTL is going to go up. And you can see this already. This isn't a prediction. Softness in LTL is already pushing more capacity into port and rail drayage. Drayage, as I'm sure you know, is short-haul trucking to and from a port and or a railhead. So folks, gentlemen, men, women, owner-operators that were doing some long-haul stuff, they're seeing softness. Well, there's still big action in drayage. All ports around the country. New York, New Jersey is crazy right now, for example. So they see that opportunity and they're putting their capacity, meaning their power units, onto dock operations and rail ramp operations. That's not a prediction, that's going on right now. Okay, questions, comments, challenges you'd like to make to what we're saying, disagreement? Ma'am. No, it's a big part of it, and what the question was, is it related to imports only? No, I think because domestic production is a part of this as well. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's not everything, but a lot of what we see moving around the country is the food we eat and the packaging that goes into it. So I think it's a combination of domestic and international. Sir? Say that again, please. Oh yeah, chassis. Yeah, so chassis are a huge deal. And again, I'll admit, I'm a little LA Long Beach centric, but our business activities take us to different places around the country, so we do have a broader perspective. The chassis, as I'm sure everybody knows, that's the wheeled metal frame upon which containers are placed and then taken off eventually. Big chassis shortage. There was just too much freight coming in during COVID. But like in a good, strong capitalist market, lots of people started investing in more chassis. So for example, I'll use LA Long Beach centric conversation. There's chassis pools out there that everybody kind of donates chassis. The drayage people I guess you could say they donate chassis and everybody shares them. It's a fiasco of epic proportions because there's 12 container terminals in LA Long Beach, and some will only take this chassis, and there's no chassis available. It goes on and on and on. Many, many companies in Savannah, and drayage people in the US too. Chicago, I know we were sitting during the War on Labor piece, and I know you're from Chicago. You know, the rail ramps, St. Louis, et cetera. There's more chassis coming in. So I think that'll get a little bit better. But who knows? Because the imbalance of equipment, meaning Murphy's Law, you know, you need a 53-footer over here, but all the 53-footers are over there. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's just, when things get really wacky and tumultuous, that's a natural consequence of a supply chain that's challenged to begin with pre-COVID. That's why a lot of us have jobs, both domestic and international, dealing with these challenges on a daily, and it just went off kilter completely. Okay. All right. Moving in a little bit more into ocean freight. Now we're talking 2023. What you see on the right-hand side, this is free. I'm all about free. You can Google this, Alpha Liner, if you don't already, and you're interested in learning more about this stuff. It's a subscription maritime statistic company, let's say. They're out of the UK, I believe. But you can get certain free stuff as a teaser. And what you see here are the top 100 companies. And this is when I was going through my presentation, and I was thinking about how I said inventories would go up. Remember I said that? And that it came out in the news in Nike, and I'm thinking, well, I don't want these people to say, yeah, no kidding. You know, Nike just announced that. Well, I was working on this presentation, this part of it, you can see, on the 28th of September. There's my validation. I went and checked. This is what an egomaniac I am. I'm working on me. I'm trying. But that wasn't funny either. You know what? You guys, I've had it with you. Just had it with you. I'm getting the feeling that, and I know Ken and Hiram are going to close out, but I'm the only thing you know the old saying, I'm the only thing between you guys and a cocktail? No. I'm the only thing between me and a cocktail. Can't always be about you, okay? So you want me to speed it up? I'm getting that feeling. You want me to speed it up? We can go right to the punchline here. This shows the top 20 carriers. It's 100, I just cut it off. Maersk, well, they got surpassed by Med Shipping. But of course, Med Shipping and Maersk are in an alliance together. So together, the two top carriers represent 34% of the entire market. But why did I put this up here? Because in dark blue, that's their existing fleet, expressed in TEU, 20-foot equivalency units, and blue's the order book. Ships on order. It takes 3 years to build one of these vessels that can carry 18,000 TEU. There's more capacity coming into the market. That's what we're talking about here. And by the way, I saw someone kind enough to take a picture of that slide. This is your property. There's no pride of authorship here. If you flatter me and you want a copy of the presentation, you can get it directly from our friends at Pegasus. It's in the public realm, as they say now. So you can certainly, if you'd like a copy, you can have one. But you can see there's more, the point is this, there's more capacity coming in, more ships coming in. With that said, we already know, and I'm not going to talk specific numbers, it's just not, I don't want to do that. Ocean freight rates from China will continue to drop, guaranteed. And the carriers who know that they have more ships coming on and that they already have too much capacity, what do? What's the terminology that's used? There's too many ships and not enough merchandise coming in from anywhere, Asia predominantly. What do? What's that called? Speak up, please. Blank sailings. It's like back in the day, a flight would get canceled because there weren't enough passengers, and it was a mechanical. It's the same principle. They'll blank a sailing. They'll park a ship. There's only so much of that you can do because it costs money to park a ship. They're not generating revenue. There's a limit to that. They're manipulating supply. There will be an ongoing pendulum effect of port congestion between the East Coast and West Coast. This has been going on forever, certainly in the 17 years that I've been in Southern California, especially during labor talks. We'll get to that in a second on the West Coast Labor Union. But companies that import a lot will forego going through LA Long Beach and once again come through the Panama Canal, all water, Miami, Houston, Savannah, etc. That's precisely what happened. Pendulum effect. So now it's going to swing back because LA Long Beach is going to panic and we're losing all this freight and what have you. That's not going to change. That container chassis imbalance, I think it'll get a little bit better because companies are investing more in chassis. But the congestion at the rail ramps, Chicago, my friend, and I know you mentioned, certainly without sharing any proprietary information, that you're an importer. You do IPI moves into Chicago warehouse or in that area and deal with chassis at the ramps too? Yeah, it's pretty brutal. This is where we start to talk a little bit. We're going to talk about it more in the next slide, where things like nearshoring and reshoring come into play. Shifts in import sourcing away from China will also put downward pressure on China to U.S. rates. China was getting to be too expensive. Certainly coastal China, for the manufacture of goods, was getting too expensive to begin with. Then you had the Section 301 tariffs go in. We'll talk about that in a minute, more commonly known as the Trump tariffs. China, don't underestimate China. China isn't going anywhere, either commercially, geopolitically. They're not going anywhere. They will have less volume. So that's for certain. Putting downward pressure on rates. More on that in just one sec. As a result, other maritime trade lanes will stabilize from a rate perspective. Southeast Asia and the subcontinent. Subcontinent being India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and kinda Myanmar. Okay. Couple of more projections. What is OSRA 2022? And I'll give you a hint. This is on the international side of things that impacts domestic trucking for sure, because domestic trucking is a natural consequence of imported containers. What's OSRA 2022? It's an acronym. For a free trip for two, sponsored by Pegasus, or not, to San Pedro, I was going to say Cabo, but that's more of an LA thing, to San Pedro Island, and if I see anyone Googling, you're DQ'd automatically. What's OSRA 2022 stand for? Ocean Shipping Reform Act. Legislation, it is the law, signed into law by the Biden administration in June of this year. You're familiar with demurrage and detention, storage fees on containers, basically at rail ramps and ocean terminals. A lot of abuses in that field over the last couple of years, pretty brutal. Highly publicized by the Federal Maritime Commission. The way that law has been implemented, and I think it was necessary, to be honest with you, we're not here to debate that, but great idea, poorly implemented. If you're an importer, you deal with ocean containers. If you're a 3PL, you're an NVOCC, an ocean freight forwarder. You offer drayage services through a third party to complement your integrated logistics solution. If you don't know OSRA 2022, you need to get to know it quickly. And there's two provisions, invoice requirements and charge complaints that you really need to pay attention to. And I have the whole thing on another deck. Pretty sure my email address is up at the end. If you want that deck, so you don't have to read through the whole legalese of what Congress managed to put together when they don't know anything about logistics, I'll gladly share that presentation with you. Okay. High profile stuff that impact us all. 3PLs, importers, exporters. The ocean carriers, so flush with money because they were taking advantage of market conditions during, that's that Boston in me coming out, taking advantage of market conditions, they just made more money. They made more money in a year than they made in the previous 10 years combined. That's a real number. Flush with cash. CMA, CGM, third largest steamship line in the world, French owned. That's not photoshopped. That's a real aircraft. They're in the air cargo business now. Who else just announced? Well, it's up there. Kind of an easy question. Who else just announced they're getting into the air freight business? Med Shipping, the largest steamship line in the world, bringing in more cargo, air cargo capacity. You couple that with passenger flights, belly space as it's called for cargo, they're coming back on too, because why? We're not buying air fryers online anymore. We're going to Cabo, and we're flying down there. And passenger aircraft will carry cargo as well. Overcapacity, soft demand drives down international air freight rates. Ocean carriers will also keep moving in traditional forwarder CHB, that's custom house brokerage activities. Who did Maersk acquire? Send it to forwarding. Good size, good global organization, solid, not huge, but right in there as a player. Scoop them up to not just be moving containers from CY to CY, container yard to container yard, to get into the forwarding business. Strange bedfellows, because it's the steamship lines that are selling space to the freight forwarders who turn around and resell that space in the market. That's what an NVOCC does. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. And then, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but this impacts us as consumers. The de minimis rule of $800 for Section 321 shipments. This is me as a licensed customs broker. I just had to throw it in there because I can't not, as a customs broker dweeb. The de minimis rule of $800 for Section 321 shipments will remain in effect. You go online as a consumer, an individual person. You spend, pick a number, $500 in shoes. It used to be, and almost all shoes are imported, by the way. Let's start with that. It used to be, still is, but used to be exclusively an importer of footwear would bring the merchandise into the United States, clear customs, pay duties, stick it in a warehouse, and hope someone buys it. Now, without you even knowing this, if you go online and buy anything that's legal, with the exception of alcohol and tobacco, because that's subject to excise taxes and whatnot, if the value of your purchase as an individual person is less than $800, that order can be fulfilled from origin. A shoe factory in Vietnam. You won't even know it. You know how you're going to know it? Because it takes 6 weeks for you to get your shoes, because they put it on a ship. That's what de minimis means. This is a new law that came into play in 2018. Essentially, you call it the Amazon law, or the Alibaba law. That's going to remain in effect, because what has happened is people have legally gamed the system, what's referred to as regulatory capture. They went out and figured out the regulations, and they are taking full advantage of this rule. De minimis used to be $200 in 2018. Congress raises it to $800, stimulate e-commerce, make it easier for people to buy stuff, It's been gamed to the max. I'll explain how in just a sec. That's not going to change, I think. As air freight rates come down, these Section 321 shipments, Type 86 entries, that's the de minimis rule. That's the type of customs entry. Again, without getting too far into the weeds, this is a specific type of customs entry. It's called a Type 86 entry. You go online, spend $5 on shoes, it comes in from Vietnam, that's a Type 86 entry. All transparent to you. You don't have to futz around with customs clearance, duties, the whole deal. You just get your shoes and everybody's happy. Unless you return 4 out of the 5 pairs, and then who are you going to return them to? Because the factory's in Vietnam. That's a whole other story. But here's the thing, and this is super interesting for you all, especially Texas, and even potentially Pegasus, because the spirit of that law, Type 86 entries, was that the order will be fulfilled from the factory at origin. China, Vietnam, maybe wearing apparel coming in out of Central America, it doesn't even matter. But what companies, especially 3PLs, have very cleverly done is set up bonded facilities on the Mexican side of the US border, and instead of having to fulfill an order in an ocean container from Vietnam to the US and you get your shoes, or you get your shoes 6 weeks later, they bring the containers into LA Long Beach or San Diego, truck them in bond down to TJ, Mexicali, wherever you want, and then they fulfill those orders from there. Because the only requirement is that the order be fulfilled from overseas. Is TJ not part of Mexico? That's a yes. Doing it all day long. Huge opportunities on the Mexican border. What's the risk in that? The Congress says, you know what, we don't like that $800 de minimis anymore. We're putting it back to $200. Whole different ball game, but a huge opportunity, at least in the short term, there. Starting to wrap things up. We started at 3:15, no? So I'm okay, kinda? I'm okay time-wise. I don't know if I'm any good entertainment-wise, but that's your problem. I don't have to be anywhere till tomorrow. I could be up here till 6 o'clock. Okay. Let's start talking about these Section 301 tariffs. Someone enlighten us. What is a Section 301 tariff? Help me out here. Major impact on us as consumers and as logistics, supply chain, and sourcing professionals. Across the board, the entire supply chain spectrum. What are the Section 320, sorry, see, I even get it screwed up. Section 301 tariffs, what are those? Anybody? Go back, let's call it, starting in 2018. So President Trump used an executive order because it's Congress, actually, that controls tariffs. Go read the Constitution. It's in there. Among other things, Congress controls trade agreements, tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. President Trump used an executive order to place an extra 25% duty on China on any existing duties coming in. They're called the Section 301 tariffs. It's a law, more commonly known as the Trump tariffs. Well, that made imports coming in from China 25% more expensive right out of the gate. And anytime, in most instances, a country places high duty rates, import taxes, on a specific country, it's to discourage companies from doing trade with that company because we have some very legitimate concerns as a country about the geopolitical aspirations of China and how they're not aligned with our worldview. That's real, and it should be a concern for all of us. So I'm not here to state otherwise. But here's the deal. If you're importing from China for 30 years, 40 years, and I know people, friends, clients that have been literally started in the 80s importing from China, established relationships with vendors that make their stuff for them to go from one day to the next, literally one day to the next. The purchase price of the goods, the landed cost of the goods you're bringing in from China just went up 25% because the duties are 25% higher. That's straight out of your pocket. How you respond to that as the importer, different ballgame. Do you go back and ask the vendor to take a haircut? Do you raise prices to the consumer? Do you take a haircut yourself? The real outcome has been a combination of all of them. So this has been going on before COVID, actually. And it fueled, see, in Pavlov's dog, I've learned, don't get too close to that thing, but companies know that China over time is not sustainable. But I'm saying that the 301 tariffs, they're going to stay in place throughout 2023. I'm doubling down. I predicted this at the beginning of last year when people said, oh, they're going to remove the tariffs and it's impacting inflation. Yeah, but they're not going to remove the tariffs. You want to know why? Two reasons. One, the United States Treasury needs the money. That's where customs duties of revenue for the United States government. It's tariff money or tax money or a combination of the two. The other piece, it's just bad optics for the Biden administration. Automatically, oh, we're going to remove the tariffs on China, which is debatable at this point. I'm kind of up in the air, to be honest with you, but I'm leaning towards they never should have been put in place in the first place. Whole other story. But should they be removed? I'd have to go with a yes, knowing that we're going to lose billions of revenue in customs duties. But I don't think that's going to happen because it's bad optics, and I have no political dog in any fight, especially in a public environment. But you can just envision that President Biden's opposition, they're going to say, China lover. It's not going to happen. You watch. I said it last year. I'm doubling down on this year. So what happens? China plus one strategy. China plus one strategy has been around since the late 90s because people that in the know could see China becoming more expensive anyway, regardless of these cataclysmic events. So China plus one would be, yeah, we've got that vendor in Shenzhen making our jeans for us, but let's start looking at Guatemala, that, by the way, has a free trade agreement with the United States, shorter lead time, good landed costs, et cetera. This has been going on for a while. It's been accelerated for this reason, and even more so during COVID. That's going to continue. Near sourcing. So that's basically the Western Hemisphere. Canada, Mexico, which of course has the updated NAFTA agreement. It's now called US-Mexico-Canada agreement. But near sourcing, there's a big leap from moving from vendors that companies have been working with for a long time. And it doesn't have to be Asia, but it predominantly is. That's just a statistical fact. But this whole, well, just stop buying in China and go buy your stuff in Cambodia. Or better yet, nearshoring, go buy it in Mexico. I've worked the Mexico trade for 20 years. I lived in deep Mexico for 4 years in the logistics business. So don't claim to be an expert, but have access to people who know a lot about this stuff. The thing about near sourcing is that the built-in assumption is that there's an ecosystem to support the manufacturing, which is to say, you have the main manufacturer, and then you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, the raw materials people. That's what's missing. You can have the manufacturing base, maybe, because lots of companies, if you got the idea, oh, we're just going to move from China to Mexico, not the first person to think of that. So the demand on existing plant in Mexico is considerable. Then you have to think about the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. When I was in the freight forwarding business, it was DHL Global Forwarding, company I worked for was acquired. I'm talking 12 years ago now. We had a gateway in Miami, bonded gateway, and we were doing 1,000 tons a month of air freight. That's a lot. That's 1 million kilos, 2.2 million pounds. 1,000 tons a month of air freight out of Asia, all raw materials, would pick it up at the airport at LAX, truck it over to the bonded facility, and then send it where? Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, where all the contract manufacturers were. All the raw materials going into this stuff. So until such time, and I would encourage people to explore opportunities, not just in Mexico, but Central America, Colombia, Peru, Chile. We have free trade agreements with Mexico, all of Central America, including the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. Did you know that? That the United States has free trade agreements with all of those countries already for years. The infrastructure hasn't been there historically to pursue it. Now, I say now the time was honestly, for Mexico, was 20 years ago. So I would encourage companies, especially you BCOs, beneficial cargo owners, shippers and such, if you're into this whole thing, look into Mexico, and unsolicited plug, look to Pegasus for that support because they have infrastructure and have grown considerably in Mexico. Alrighty, so sourcing shifts out of China to other Asian countries will create more inbound transportation opportunities for 3PLs, third-party logistics companies. If you're a freight forwarder and you have your own office in South China, some good agents in China, et cetera, that's not going to be enough because your customers are moving around. And a good 3PL is not only going to move with their customer, but anticipate their customers' moves like Pegasus has done in Mexico and be there to support them. So as a 3PL, you have to be looking ahead at who these countries are, and as a BCO, looking to your logistics provider to be there with you, because just because someone was good in China doesn't mean they're going to be good in Costa Rica, right? Okie dokie. Here's the last one. U.S. initiatives that thwart China's economic and geopolitical ambitions. This is not a free trade agreement. It's just in the discussion stages, but it's not a coincidence. It's called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Remember TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the U.S. was involved in, exited back in 2017, maybe? This is partial in response to that. And you'll notice the Indo piece, the big player here is India. Did you know that because of shifts in sourcing from China to India, the trade with India in the last year increased 50% with the United States? They'll soon be our number 3 or number 2 trading partner in short order. That's that subcontinent that we spoke of previously. So pay attention to that stuff. More on the longer term, yeah? Alrighty, starting to wind things down. I still have 15 minutes. All right, good, almost finished. You hear a lot about log tech, logistics technology, and visibility. If I hear the word visibility and resilience one more time, I'm gonna hit my head against the wall, because that's all you hear in supply chain circles. In my business, as a consultant, we deal a lot with startups, with product development guidance. A lot of these companies have great ideas. They don't know where they fit in the logistics and supply chain ecosystem, to be honest with you. So we help them with that. So I have some visibility into this. Don't claim to be a technological expert by any means. But what you see, especially in the visibility space, I'm talking truck visibility, digital freight platforms, ocean freight tracking visibility. I won't even say that it's quickly becoming a commodity. It is a commodity. You know what it costs? Because I know this, I just went through this exercise, to hire a third party to provide underlying ocean container visibility from origin, container yard to container yard, across the ocean, you know, the little Google map with the ship and all this business, into the container yard, status on the yard, per container. You know how much that costs? You couldn't buy a quarter of a Happy Meal in California for what that costs per container. I can go buy container visibility from 15 different people for $2 a container. That's not a commodity. The point here is that companies, shippers, and 3PLs have to take advantage of the technology that's out there to build a broader, more expansive value proposition where visibility and tech is just part of the deal. You know what really matters? And this is one of the reasons why I like Pegasus so much. Corporate culture. I spoke of this at the top end. People who care. That's what it comes down to. All the tech in the world will not help you unless the people that are using it give a care about what they're doing. So pay attention to technology, huge advancements. I remember, I hate to age myself, and I'm not even kidding, that the cutting edge technology for container tracking and PO management and, you know, where's the truck? The fax machine, if you can believe this. I worked in a 50-person office in Boston. Freight forwarder, customs broker, domestic transportation. The fax machine, this is ridiculous. The fax machine was so cutting edge that of the 50 people, only one guy was allowed to use the fax machine. And of course, I have a slight New England accent. I'll never forget, the guy's name was Adi. Adi, I gotta send a fax. That was only 30 years ago. The technology that's out there today is amazing. Take advantage of it, but don't get taken advantage of, because it's really coming down in price. Warehouse automation will continue to amaze, we all know that. Here's another well, it's not a prediction. Let's not forget about Amazon. They're pretty good logisticians. And there was a thing, and I have zero, I told you I'd tell you this, zero inside scoop, zero anything on this. But the guy, excuse me, what is essentially Jeff Bezos' literally right-hand man, Dave Clark was his name, Chief Operating Officer of Amazon worldwide. You know who Flexport is? The digital freight forwarder. They've done a lot. I give these folks a lot of credit. But they've also been maligned in the industry. But in 4 or 5 years, they went from being a nobody to being number 9 in container volume around the world. So they must be doing something right. They have their challenges. So this guy, Dave Clark, speculative by me 100%. Dave Clark leaves Amazon to go become the CEO of Flexport. Fox is in the hen house. Don't be surprised if Amazon buys Flexport. Supply chain disruptions will be around for as long as COVID is. Unfortunately, climate change events, regardless of our thoughts on the source of climate change, it's real and will continue to wreak havoc on supply chains. At lunchtime, had the good fortune to sit next to a gentleman from Vancouver, sitting right here, as a matter of fact. And we were talking about how the rail ramp or the rail connection from the Port of Vancouver last year washed out because of torrential rains. Southern Cal, drayage of containers from LA Long Beach to Phoenix. You're hearing stories of truckers at a truck stop who go in and take a shower, come out, and they can't get their truck because it's six inches deep because the asphalt is melting. This is for real. What do you think the tragedy in Florida is going to do? Not just the Florida supply chains, but national supply chains. And how all of a sudden the demand for lumber and drywall and everything else is going to be sucked up into that part of the country. It's real. And then finally, tragically, the real wild card will be war-borne supply chain disruptions. We all know about Ukraine. When I say China's geopolitical aspirations, that's just a euphemism for Taiwan. That's for real. I've been, well, as last night, actually, I've been reading this book on the history of China. And I'm talking from 200 BC to now. Fascinating. Just try to understand what the mindset is. I've been to China so many times I lost count. So I've had an opportunity to go and see. But to be able to learn more, we should all endeavor to do these things to understand our friends and people that maybe someday can be our friends. It's kind of a paradox, don't you think, that our number one import trading partner is who? China, by a long shot. But yet we have all of these geopolitical disagreements with them. Think about that. All right, almost done. I'm going out on a limb here. All the talk about the strike on the West Coast, the ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. I'm here to tell you that there will be no strike on the West Coast. Zero inside scoop. The closest I'd ever come is that my daughter played club soccer and a couple of the dads of the other girls were union guys at the port. That was 5 years ago, so I'm a little out of touch. Let me preface what I'm going to say by that I was in a union as a younger man. My brother was the president of his local as an electrician. We're a blue-collar union family. I believe in the importance of collective bargaining, and no beef at all. That's dangerous work at the ports. If you've ever been Houston or Galveston or Savannah, LA, Long Beach, different ball game. Different ball game. Dangerous work down there, so much respect to them. This is LA, Long Beach here. LA on this side, Long Beach on that side. Why do I think there isn't going to be a strike? Well, I've been in California for 17 years. I've seen this 3 times already. What's different? The union knows that the steamship lines and the marine terminal operators, of which there are 12 in LA, and the union is Seattle down to San Diego, by the way. And let's define strike before I go any further. I'm not talking work stoppages, people organized, 50 men and women calling sick the same day. That's not a strike. I'm talking Seattle to San Diego, out front with the sign that says GFY. You familiar with that acronym? It's an important one in the logistics world. If you don't know, ask your neighbor. That's what I mean by a strike. With that said, the union knows the steamship lines and the marine terminal operators have more money than they know what to do with. They're going to ante up big time. The big beef on the union side has always been automation. Understandable. That has been kicked down the road for as long as I've been in California and before that. So someone might say, well, Pier 400, the Maersk terminal, the APM Maersk terminal, the union's refusing to work the automated terminal there. Well, yep. But that terminal went into operation in 2020. It was never a problem before. So a little saber rattling? Maybe. Not to mention that they transferred those ships from LA over to Long Beach, where LBCT, the Long Beach Container Terminal, is the most automated container terminal in the Western Hemisphere. That's where they work the ships. 6 of one, half a dozen of another. What's the other point? Dust-ups in Seattle. I just mentioned APM Terminal, Pier 400 in LA. It's all part of their campaign. Second to the last piece, because I added something in my mind after I submitted this report. I should say this presentation. But as we saw in the rail strike, and as clearly shown through Supreme Court precedents, the federal government can step in and say, you guys and ladies need to get back to the bargaining table. You're not going on strike. I mean, they won't say it that way, but that's the message. And work out your differences. Because the optics around, again, political optics around supply chain issues, the Biden administration has its name all over supply chain issues. With Pete Buttigieg, the the Secretary of Transportation, who, I don't know the gentleman, served his country in a time of war. I know that. He'll get my support just for that, but he doesn't come from a logistics background. So he's limited in terms of what he can really say and do. But when you're standing on the terminal with the two port directors, who I know personally, Gene Soroka and Mario Cordero, side by side, putting their label on supply chain issues, which drive inflation, by the way, will not happen. They won't let it happen. You might not hear about it. It's going to be behind the scenes. It's another reason why. Here's the last reason, and we're almost finished, and thank you for indulging me. This is more geographic, going back to that China plus one story. What is the biggest advantage that LA Long Beach has had for the last 40 years? It's the closest US port to China. But as China plus one happens, and you go Vietnam, Laos, now we're going west, Myanmar, Bangladesh, we're in the subcontinent now, India, Pakistan, what happens? Those countries can export, go through the Suez Canal, through the Med, and to the east coast of the United States, where the vast majority of the population is. You don't think that the union people know that? They're taking geography classes as we speak, if they don't know that. The other piece, of course, is that the volumes have been down because Savannah's getting more, people are panicking, they're diverting. I've been wrong before. I don't think I'm going to be wrong about this. And if I am, jot down my phone number and email at the end of this presentation and say, hey, Mr. GFY, what do you think of me now? Okay, last slide. So what's the company to do? Meaning a BCO, a beneficial cargo owner, essentially a shipper like you. This is easy for me to say. You know, the consultant, I was joking with Ken and Chad, it was this morning, about being a consultant. I was like, yeah, I'd much rather talk about work than actually do any. You know, tell people you need to do this. This falls into that category. And there's been some news on this as well. Because supply chain, at the end of the day, 80% of it is inventory management. The rest is logistics, is a subset. There's a lot to it, but let's call it 70% of supply chain is inventory management. The bullwhip effect, you get stuck with too much merchandise, you don't have enough merchandise. It's the Goldilocks effect. The soup's always too hot. It's either too hot or too cold, meaning you either have too much stuff or not enough. It's never perfect. So if you want to reduce inventory risk, don't carry so much of it. I use this anecdote. I went to Target not too long ago. I wanted to get some ankle-high socks, you know, to work out and walk and what have you. I was overwhelmed with the SKU choices I had. You know, gray, white, ankle, below the ankle, above the, I was like, Jesus, can I get a bag of socks, for goodness sakes? Too many SKUs out there. Black & Decker announced, because they had huge issues with their supply chain, we're cutting our SKUs, we're cutting our product offering. Sales and operations planning, an integral part of your supply chain. Your 3PL can help you with that. We could talk for 4 hours on sales and operations planning. Essentially what it comes down to, you as a shipper, a company, you have a sales forecast of the products you're going to sell throughout the year. You have to go out and acquire or manufacture those products. That means you either have to get them domestically as finished goods from overseas as finished goods, or bring in raw materials and then make the finished goods. The year starts, sales start happening. Month 1, there's going to be a variance between what we thought we were going to sell and what we sold and what items comprised that variance. S&OP, as it's called, is where companies sit down, believe it or not, and go item by item and say, hey, this item's selling well, this item isn't. We have a new product introduction coming up in a month. What the heck are we going to do with this? We have 10 POs out for a zillion items that aren't selling well. Are we going to cancel those purchase orders on our vendors? Are we going to reduce those purchase orders? Think of this. As a sophisticated 3PL like Pegasus, would they be in a position from a logistics support perspective to augment your efforts in sales and operations planning? There's no question. Not even up for debate. So think about that. If you import from China, you're not changing vendors tomorrow. It takes 3 to 5 years, believe it or not, because I've done this, to develop a good, strong relationship with your vendors. If you're all in on China now, and you're in a labor-intensive, wearing apparel, footwear, I'd have to say you're You have challenges if you don't have a plan already. Look at countries that have free trade agreements with the United States. Canada, Mexico, all of Central America, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Peru, Chile, all have free trade agreements with the US, and they're all involved, to a certain extent, in the manufacture of products that might fit your profile. Invest in technology, but bear in mind, it won't solve all your challenges. And work with domestic and international partners that you can rely on to help make you more competitive. There's a reason why my company's called Trade Facilitators. It's because I came from a freight forwarding and customs brokerage background. I never considered myself a freight forwarder or a customs broker. I always considered myself a trade facilitator. Make it easy as a 3PL for your customers to do business, because selfishly, what's going to happen? They're going to sell more, and you're going to handle more cargo. As a BCO, you want to be involved in that virtuous cycle and work with companies that will contribute to your overall competitiveness. And as Winston Churchill famously said, all boats rise on an incoming tide. Pegasus can do that for you. And by the way, when we talked about this presentation, it was always about the presentation. It wasn't work in a pitch, work in this for Pegasus. They don't roll like that. I'm taking some creative license here. And I'm just telling you what you probably already know. This is a legitimate organization. So, now there's nothing between you and whatever it is you want to do, okay? Because this is the stockyards after all. But thank you. Thank you again to Ken and team. John Wayne, thank you. Stay safe. Enjoy the holidays. And if any of my predictions show up bogus, there it is, write it down. And you can put on the email GFY. Danny, F and G, GFY. Okay? Thank you.